Okay, thank you. And blessings and hello to everyone. So let's see. The owls are in place. So the owls are in place. So owl, begin now. Albert Einstein said, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity." And I'm not so sure about the universe. On a related note, Charles Schulz said, "I love mankind, it's people I can't stand." I expect Charles Schulz has a lot of Aquarius in his chart. So these quotes, although a bit pessimistic, they do raise an important point. In our journey and quest to develop love and wisdom, we inevitably face and encounter that which is not love and not wisdom. We can face ignorance, any number of vices, retrogressive influences, and downright hostility from other people in various groups, even cosmic sources, and if we're willing to admit it, even within ourselves. So, what we need is a wise and loving approach to the unwise and unloving. And a first point to make is that there is a method to the madness, that our struggle that we have is ultimately serving a purpose on an abstract level. There is what we'd say is, well, use an analogy here. Like how do we grow on a physical level? We can grow that way through physical exercise, and doing that, we do that through resistance training. We push against, we lift weights, and that resistance creates strength. That resistance are those points of tension. And there is a similar analogy on emotional and mental and spiritual levels. So we can say that ultimately the evil or the struggle makes us aware of and appreciate the good in life. Like, consider the Garden of Eden and the mythical Garden of Eden, where humanity, at least as described in it, was basically good, but in a more instinctual, unconscious manner. And then out of the Garden of Eden, we went to basically having more free will so that we could consciously express ourselves for either good or evil. And then only after evolution are we consciously good. So in other words, it's from unconscious goodness to conscious evil to conscious goodness. And right now, humanity is on the conscious expressing both good and evil, but we're rapidly moving toward good. And so, yes, so there is a balance. We don't need to intentionally seek out problems or troubles in the world. We're trying to solve them, but we can at least recognize the role of challenges and how they create growth and evolution. So there's a couple of examples. Like, one is that a volcano is definitely destructive, and one might call it evil, but it isn't. It's just the destructive nature that creates ultimately new life, and definitely challenge for those that are near volcanoes. But really, ultimately, a volcano, like many destructive influences, it destroys the old and destroys old forms so that they can be replaced with new and better forms ultimately. And on a related note, there's physical death is definitely traumatic, and we try to avoid it for good reason because the form plays an important role in evolution. But ultimately, when death and destruction of the form does happen, it is, quoting the Tibetan, salvation from the body nature through the process of death. So there is a balance that we want to have. Like, I'd say the right energetic attitudes. And so this is we want to take right action in the world, but at the same time be detached from the results. Balanced detachment, as it can be called. And often in our growth process, we have it reversed. We can be frozen or lazy or otherwise being in inaction, but at the same time, we're attached to the results. Like it can be one saying, the world sucks, it's going to heck in a handbasket. But they're not actually taking the right actions to change things. And so on an esoteric level, we want to be polarized physically and causally, meaning we want to take the physical action, making use of our physical bodies, and also putting into motion the bright causes on inner levels, instead of being astrally polarized, where we're reactive to the results and attached to them. And so the Tibetan has a quotation here about this, and he says, "I would ask you, as far as you possibly can, to insulate yourself from fear and from the effect of the world situation and its allied problems. I would ask you to carry forward this insulation along the line of love. This method is occult and safe and constitutes no barrier to relationships, as does the building of a separative wall." So along with balanced detachment is balanced right action, which again means we want to hold to a peaceful purpose. We want to hold to the spiritual purpose of what we're aiming toward, but at the same time, we don't want to be blindly pacifist. And again, sometimes we have it reversed. We can be harmful in purpose. We can be saying, these people that I don't like, I hope that they have fall on their faces and any number of other bad things happen to them. But again, we can be inactive in the actions and causes that really matter. And here's another quotation. "When the war broke out and humanity chose to fight, and the forces of evil were let loose upon our planet, the hierarchy ceased its efforts to bring peace through goodwill and openly sided with those fighting to drive evil back whence it came and to defeat the Axis nations." That's in reference to World War II. So, but of course, remember that peace and goodwill was still the goal. It just means recognizing that sometimes strong measures are needed. So, what is the real problem we face? What is the real struggle going on? And you can say that we're fighting for not a specific outer material result, but really seeking to build unity. And therefore, the enemy is really the essences of imbalance, or the great heresy of separation, as it's been called, and hatred itself. And this can be seen in this line about the new group of world servers and how they are oriented. "The members of the new group of world servers belong to no party or religion, and yet belong to all parties and religions. They assume no attitude or position, either for or against any government, religion, or social order. They engage in no political activity of any kind, and attack no existing order. They say nothing and write no word which could feed the fires of hatred, or tend to separate man from man, or nation from nation. Yet these members will be found in every political party and every world religion. They represent an attitude of mind." And by the way, this is not a contradiction from the previous quote or message about the hierarchy supporting the fight of the forces of good. And here, this seems more neutral and inactive, because what's important is to have the action, the right action, and have to be active and inactive in the right ways and on the right levels, basically. So, it may help to see or to perceive things or orient them in our mind as not good versus evil, which is like a classic duality, but it may help to think of it more as evolved alongside unevolved. So a very simple definition of what we'd call quote-unquote evil is action without wisdom. It's where you can have personality development such that the mind and emotions have reached a certain level such that one can be active, but when the soul development hasn't happened yet, and therefore one has has a certain selfishness or a ring past knot that's basically oriented around their own individual self, and therefore they're acting from that perspective. So it's a natural stage, one to be outgrown, but still a natural stage that we are encountering at least at this point on our timeline of human evolution. And a classic saying that is in alignment with this is, to be old and wise, you must first be young and foolish. And remember that parents, they love their children unconditionally, even though they still provide discipline, which is also important. And in extending that to us, we want to be patient, not passive, but patient with the unevolved. And it may help to visualize that, or realize how the masters, I'm sure, are very patient with ourselves as disciples. I mean, we can, from our point of view, see the unevolved as a certain types of levels of consciousness, but the masters, I'm sure, can see it very differently, and we are the unevolved to them. So a little image that may help is to realize that, like, consider like criminals or whatever. They are pre-first initiation. And let us say that we've taken the first initiation or even the second initiation ourselves. And therefore, there are 2 initiations different between us. A little math here. And then the masters and chohans, 5th and 6th initiation, there's like 3 initiations beyond that. And so from their more inclusive, holistic view, they are likely to see all of humanity, or everybody that's before the first soul initiation, as relatively like elementals are all together. And so it can just help to realize that we are all growing together. There's always more steps on the ladder. And here's a humbling quotation. In the early stages of human unfoldment, all men are unconscious black magicians. And therefore, that can help us realize that it's not necessarily good or evil boxes. You're the good ones, you're the bad ones. But just to realize that to see it as more of a gradual refinement in others and in ourselves as we tread the path. So again, like parents dealing with unruly children, we want to reject the behaviors or the mess that's made, but not the person or their soul. And we want empathy and understanding, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we want to condone or enable bad behavior. We want the love and wisdom combined. We want the empathy and understanding of love, but you want the wisdom of how to properly deal with challenging conditions in others or in ourselves. And so there's a few balanced approaches that may be helpful. Like, one is we want to recognize the quote-unquote evil or the badness in society, and we don't want to try to make a false equivalence or a false moral equivalence and say that everything is the same, but we want to, again, have the balance and not increase separation in our approaches to that. And another useful balance is to have is that we want to guard ourselves from the various corrupting or negative influences, but again, without hating and letting it astrally entangle us. And again, that's something that we often have reversed. Sometimes we are open ourselves to any number of negative influences out there, but we also are hating the hatred. And so we want to have it reversed, to be strong in our state and with love in our hearts. And again, we want to, you can set boundaries. Setting boundaries can be necessary. And it's again like the example with dogs and puppies. We can love untrained puppies, but you don't let them run around in your house. If you do just randomly let untrained puppies into your house and run around, they're going to chew on everything and poop all over the place. So yes, so the Tibetan says, the dark brothers are, remember this always, brothers, erring and misguided, yet still sons of the one Father. Remember this always. So, what's really being gotten here is that we are one. Really, we are one. And, of course, oneness is easy to say and throw about, but it is very challenging to truly realize and especially embody. And we can realize that humanity, all of us, we are evolving together. It's not really us and them, we're all working together. And here's a again, humbling quotation that can help illustrate this. Blame not the personalities involved or the men who produce these events before which we stand today bewildered and appalled. They are only the product of the past and the victims of the present. At the same time, they are the agents of destiny, the creators of the new order, and the initiators of the new civilization. They are the destroyers of what must be destroyed before humanity can go forward along the lighted way. They are the embodiment of the personality of humanity. Blame yourselves, therefore, for what is today transpiring, and seek not to evade responsibility by placing it upon the shoulders of spectacular men or any statesman, dictator, or upon any group. Look not to one person or to one group of persons and accuse them of causing the present world condition. Look also not to any one person or group to bring liberation or to find a solution to the world problem. So, related to oneness and our interaction is what I call the glamour of heroes and villains. Now, what is the glamour of heroes and villains? It is a tendency to see good or bad events as controlled by individuals, and then as a result, we tend to idolize or condemn such personalities. And it can affect our perceptions in various ways. We can see our perceptions of political leaders, religious figures, and basically anybody famous. And what we want to realize is that there's more about the collective energies, whether positive or negative, and groups. And these energies manifest through individuals or even avatars in special cases. And it's important to realize that many groups or energies out there need a leader and appoint a leader. And therefore that we don't necessarily want to blame the leader, because if they were not present, then someone else would just arise to take their place as a representation of those energies. Now, this does not reduce the individual impact that each of us can have, positively or negatively. It doesn't reduce the positive impact or the karma that we have if we align with positive or negative causes. But it does help us put things in perspective and understand the real sources of what's going on. So, like, there's an example. Consider Neil Armstrong, the first person to walk upon the surface of the moon. And, you know, that's a hero. I don't want to take anything away from his accomplishment to do that. But we should also recognize that there is a lot of group activity which placed him there. There is, for example, all the other astronauts that went on the earlier missions to help pave the way. And then there's all the scientists that helped develop the technology for rockets, and even the politicians that created funding for the space program. And even, I don't want to leave them out, even the janitors that are going around NASA picking up the trash and wiping the floors. I mean, all of them, there's a massive group activity going on to create something that like the moon landing. And so we can say that Neil Armstrong did an excellent job, but again, it's a very much a group activity. So, as above, so below. We have a few examples pictured here, which I find inspiring, of how you can see, like, a brain cell looks very similar to the universe as a whole. And then even the birth of a cell on a microcosm level and the death of a star also look quite similar. And even a human eye and a nebula. So yes, as above, so below. There's lots that can be said about it, but I will restrict that to at least our struggles to be loving and wise. And we can realize that our individual struggles are reflected on a planetary level. Like there's an analogy between the personal dweller on the threshold, or sum total of the personality influence, and the angel of the presence of the soul influence, and the black and white lodges that exist on a planetary level. And it follows that working on our own issues is the best way to solve planetary issues. And we can realize that we are all in this together. And here's a couple of quotations. This cycle has its correspondence in the Atlantean root race and its conflict between the Lords of the Dark Face and the Brotherhood of Light. Within the life of each individual, a similar conflict wages during this period. Or even more concisely, humanity today is the dweller, while the hierarchy of souls is the angel. So, a few more thoughts about what we call evil and how we can approach it or consider it. And again, we could say that the unwise and unloving is not really a problem we want to attach to people, but consider it in a more Ray 5 manner, or a more scientific manner. Unwise and unloving is a matter of dense matter in our individual bodies or collective bodies in a more macrocosmic sense. So it's important to realize that there's a lot of basically dense matter or dense energies floating around. Like we have the matter from the previous solar system before our current love-wisdom solar system, which is more dealing with the matter aspect. And so a lot of that is in the process of being redeemed over very long cycles, or even on a more closer to home, but still macrocosmic level, at least to us, is the matter from the moon chain or our own previous chain, which also has its certain karmic influences in place and that we are working together to redeem. And so I can actually have respect, in a sense, not just love, but respect for those that are struggling on earlier parts of the path with very dense aspects of matter. I mean, you can hear about people that grow up in poverty or with much less privilege than I have, or they have depression or any number of mental illnesses, and so there's a lot of struggling that's going on that's helping redeem matter through those struggles. That certainly I can respect them for that. And similarly, respect for the earlier kingdoms of nature and the way that they transmute and work with matter. So anyway, facing and transmuting our own inner dweller and our own inner evils and darknesses within will help, by extension, transmute the group dweller on the threshold and external evils. It's kind of similar to the antichrona and the group anachrona that we all form together. We each have our own anachrona, and by constructing it, that creates a strand in the group anachrona. And so it's still the same with facing our own inner dweller on the threshold and merging it with our own inner angel of the presence. And so here's an example showing how we can think of things in terms of matter, a bit more of a scientific Ray 5 matter, and how it's an essence of matter. Like, think of it as like here's an example. We're driving along and someone cuts us off on the freeway and we get really angry and we burst in anger, and maybe we roll down the window and make some rude gestures out the window and get really, really annoyed. But if you just visualize and think of that, what caused that is the matter in our astral bodies that was vibrating on a certain level and therefore is able to be reactive on a certain level. And so we want to, through our evolutionary process, refine it so that our bodies do not react in that way, and then we can react more serenely and intelligently with whatever life situations are given us. So again, a quotation. "The moon's influence is exceedingly strong and has a curious resemblance, as far as the physical planet is concerned, to the dweller on the threshold, which has such a familiar and potent effect upon the human atom." So another way to look at evil is as in terms of form and restriction. Like a simple definition is you can say that evil is when form is compelling or veiling the consciousness instead of what we really want is have consciousness direct and inspire the form. Or another way of looking at it is that evil is when form has outlived its usefulness. I mean, form has a purpose. It's an important expression and evolutionary tool. But again, we do not want to be addicted or attached or veiled by form. Now, here's a fictional example, an example from fiction that shows the problems of restrictive form. And it's the Twilight Saga by Stephanie Meyer, which is that's the one featuring the sparkly vampires. People either love it or hate it. Sometimes it depends on your age. You know, if you're 15 or under, you love it. If you're like 16 or older, you don't like it. But anyway, it featured these sparkly vampires, and they were eternally frozen in a youthful form. It's like when they become a vampire, you say 18 years old or 21 years old forever, and they have these powers, and it seems really nice. But the story even had a little bit of wisdom in there if you look beneath the surface. Because the thing is that once you're 18 and 21 years old, you're frozen that way mentally as well as physically. And then they don't really grow. The characters in there, they could be hundreds of years old, but they wouldn't grow. And after a while, they just start descending into forms of debauchery, and because they would just be kind of getting bored. They weren't really growing. And then some of the oldest vampires that are like a few thousand years old in this world, they were getting downright insane because they were just restricted by form. Form was they were seriously imprisoned by it. Okay. So sometimes the conflicts going on, they're not really good versus evil, but rather what I'd call dark gray versus light gray. In other words, there can be still one I'd say is still somewhat morally better, but they have problems too. So it's more dark gray versus light gray, and it's important to recognize that even if you're the light gray, to recognize your own faults. Or even sometimes it's red versus blue, where both sides are morally equivalent, but they are still strongly conflicting and disagreeing. And so sometimes the evil is often, not always, but often, in the conflict and the separativeness itself. And so, like an example from American politics, we can realize that the left wing and the right wing are both part of the same bird. And both wings are needed for the bird to fly. Or at least the bird can fly if both wings are cooperating and flapping together and not punching each other out and hating each other. So need unity and cooperation. So the Tibetan says, one of the major faults of disciples today is the paying of too close attention to the faults, errors, and activities of other disciples, and too little attention to their own fulfillment of the law of love and to their own dharma and work. And so the message of the harmfulness of criticism, it happens on group levels too, in addition to individual levels, which can be seen very often on the international stage, with nations often acting rather immature, like puppies, to each other. And if that message doesn't emphasize it enough, then here's another quotation. It is a common experience that argument seldom tends to alter the opinion of either side. In most cases, it but confirms the opinions already held. And of course, anybody who has a Facebook account has probably experienced that firsthand with the sharing of political memes and such. Okay. So, what can we do as disciples to promote a wise and loving approach to the unwise and unloving? Well, first, to quote the Buddha, cease to do evil. And here's a quotation from Martin Luther King Jr. he said, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And if you want that message emphasized in a stronger manner, then here's another quote by Nietzsche, who says, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And that's an important message, because sometimes, again, in fighting injustice, we don't want to be just as bad in the process. Because the vast majority of quote-unquote monsters out there don't believe that they are. Instead, they see themselves as holy warriors of light, bringing what the other guys deserve, or something like that. So we still want to battle, see that you battle, but we want to do it in the right fashions. And again, with love and wisdom in our hearts and minds and actions. So next, we want to, again quoting the Buddha, learn to do well. Now, this can be expressed, a way of doing this, through what's called the Radiatory Technique, which is from esoteric healing. Now, there's an entire Alice Bailey book on this with many hundreds of pages, and I will describe it in just a few sentences in a very extremely crude and summarized fashion. So, the Radiatory Technique, it basically operates soul to soul. And specifically, each of us, or the healer as a soul-infused personality, works on stimulating and energizing and activating the other person's, the recipient's soul, and trusting that their soul can radiate upon their own personality and create healing. It is in contrast to magnetic healing, which is more dealing with force manipulations, where one personality is manipulating or changing to affect another personality. I mean, magnetic healing has its place, but it's, at least this, on a more exalted fashion, is the soul-to-soul energy activation and trusting, working on a soul level and trusting the other person's soul to guide their personality appropriately. Now, a useful point is that realizing that the radiatory technique doesn't have to only apply to esoteric healing. It can also be applied elsewhere in daily life. And therefore we can radiate not just to other souls or other quote-unquote individual souls, because ultimately we're all one soul, but radiate to not just other individuals, but we can also radiate to groups and to humanity as a whole, and of course radiate to ourselves. And again, we can still work as personalities in the world too, or on personality levels, but the point is we are making it soul-inspired, which is a fundamental change in attitude. And so finally, what we want to do is be an example. And it turns out that being an example, a positive example, is the best way to be a teacher and is the best source of change. It is much better than preaching or trying to say, you should do this, and trying to do that from a more mental, that often just doesn't work. In other words, there's a focus on being an example. The reason why being an example is so important is that it's about really more about the life aspect. It's about being, it's about what we are, and not more about the form aspect of or what we are doing. And here's a quotation that shows that sometimes being an example is a challenge because it is easier to fight for one's principles than live up to them. And there's some other interesting points, again, relating to parents, is to realize that children do as their parents do, not as they say. And that is significant because, well, there's like the classic example of the parent who's being critical of their child and is saying, and has found that their child was doing drugs and was saying like, oh, why are you doing all this bad stuff? This is horrible. You shouldn't be doing this. And then the child says, but I did it by watching you, Dad. And so, because we have to be proper and pure ourselves if we want the rest of the world or others to be that way And of course that applies not just to children and parents, but also to, on a spiritual level, for aspirants and disciples, where you can say that aspirants do as their teachers do. And so we can realize that it is very important to realize that we are being watched actually we're being watched in multiple ways. The hierarchy is looking upon us to seeing what we do, and many of humanity is looking upon us to follow our example. And so that's a lot of responsibility, and we should live up to it. Oh, and then there's a story that is significant that I aligns with this, and it's about a guru and a disciple. And the disciple would help take care of the guru and clean sweep the temple and stuff like that, and would always give the guru the best food, like the best soup there. And then when the guru got that, he got really angry and stormed off, and the disciple was confused and went to the guru and was like, well, what's going on? And then the guru said, some of you have heard this story, but anyway, the guru said, I insist on eating the same food as the least of my disciples. And when you are the guru, I do not want you to forget this. Because it's an important message that if we worship our gurus and put them on an altar, then that suggests that we will expect to be worshipped ourselves when we are the teacher. And so humility is very important. And that's an important example to be. Not false humility, but humility is very important. And so a couple of concluding quotations is, the blue books say, live a life which is an example to others. And finally, quoting Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. And that is truly a wise and loving approach to the unwise and unloving. Thank you.